Auto-Eroticism, a study of the spontaneous manifestations of the sexual impulse. Part 3, Section 1, of Studies in the Psychology of Sex, Volume-1, by Havelock Ellis. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Auto-Eroticism, a study of the spontaneous manifestations of the sexual impulse. Part 3, Section 1. The foregoing sketch will serve to show how vast is the field of life, of normal and not merely abnormal life, more or less infused by autoerotic phenomena. If, however, we proceed to investigate precisely the exact extent, degree, and significance of such phenomena, we are met by many difficulties. We find, indeed, that no attempts have been made to study autoerotic phenomena except as regards the group, a somewhat artificial group, as I have already tried to show, collected under the term masturbation, while even here such attempts have only been made among abnormal classes of people, or have been conducted in a manner scarcely likely to yield reliable results. Still, there is a certain significance in the more careful investigations which have been made to ascertain the precise frequency of masturbation. Berger, an experienced specialist in nervous diseases, concluded in his Vorlesungen that 99% of young men and women masturbate occasionally, while the 100th conceals the truth; and Hermann Cohn appears to accept this statement as generally true in Germany. So high an estimate has of course been called in question, and since it appears to rest on no basis of careful investigation, we need not seriously consider it. It is useless to argue on suppositions, but we must cling to our definite evidence, even though it yields figures which are probably below the mark. Rohleder considers that during adolescence at least 95% of both sexes masturbate, but his figures are not founded on precise investigation. Julian Marcuse, on the basis of his own statistics, concludes that 92% of male individuals have to some extent masturbated in youth. Perhaps, also, weight attaches to the opinion of Dukes, physician to Rugby School, who states that from 90 to 95% of all boys at boarding school masturbate. Searle, of Springfield, Massachusetts, found that of 125 academic students only 8 assured them they had never masturbated, while of 347 who answered his questions, 71 denied that they practiced masturbation, which seems to imply that 79% admitted that they practiced it. Brockman, also in America, among 232 theological students, of the average age of 23½ years, and coming from various parts of the United States, found that 132 spontaneously admitted that masturbation was their most serious temptation, and all but one of these admitted that he yielded, 69 of them to a considerable extent. This is a proportion of at least 56%, the real proportion being doubtless larger, since no question has been asked as to sexual offenses. 75 practiced masturbation after conversion, and 24 after they had decided to become ministers. Only 66 mentioned sexual intercourse as their chief temptation, but altogether sexual temptations outnumbered all others together. Moraglia, who made inquiry of 200 women of the lower class in Italy, found that 120 acknowledged either that they still masturbate, or that they had done so during a long period. Gualino found that 23% of men of the professional classes in northern Italy masturbate about puberty. No account was taken of those who began later. Here in Switzerland, a correspondent writes, I have had occasion to learn from adult men whom I can trust that they have reached the age of 25 or over without sexual congress. Wir haben nicht dieses Bedürfnis, is what they said. But I believe that in the case of the Swiss mountaineers, moderate onanism is practiced as a rule. In hot countries the same habits are found at a more precocious age. In Venezuela, for instance, among the Spanish Creoles, Ernst found that in all classes boys and girls are infested with the vice of onanism. They learn it early, in the very beginning of life, from their wet nurses, generally low mulatto women, and many reasons help to foster the habit. The young men are often dissipated, and the young women often remain single. Niceforo, who shows a special knowledge of the working girl class at Rome, states that in many milliners' and dressmakers' workrooms where young girls are employed, it frequently happens that during the hottest hours of the day, between 12 and 2, when the mistress or forewoman is asleep, all the girls without exception give themselves up to masturbation. In France, a country curé assured Debrenne that among the little girls who come up for their first communion, 11 out of 12 were given to masturbation. The medical officer of a Prussian reformatory told Rohleder that nearly all the inmates over the age of puberty masturbated. Stanley Hall knew a reform school in America where masturbation was practised without exception, and he who could practise it oftenest was regarded with hero worship. Ferriani, who has made an elaborate study of youthful criminality in Italy, states that even if all boys and girls among the general population do not masturbate, it is certainly so among those who have a tendency to crime. Among 458 adult male criminals, Maro, as he states in his Caratteri dei Delinquenti, found that only 72 denied masturbation, while 386 had practised it from an early age, 140 of them before the age of 13. Among 30 criminal women, Moraglia found that 24 acknowledged the practice, at all events in early youth, 8 of them before the age of 10, a precocity accompanied by average precocity in menstruation, while he suspected that most of the remainder were not unfamiliar with the practice. Among prostitutes of whatever class or position, Moraglia found masturbation, though it must be pointed out that he does not appear to distinguish masturbation very clearly from homosexual practices, to be universal. In one group of 50 prostitutes every one had practised masturbation at some period. 28 began between the ages of 6 and 11, 19 between 12 and 14, the most usual period, a precocious one, of commencing puberty, the remaining 3 at 15 and 16. The average age of commencing masturbation, it may be added, was 11, while that of the first sexual intercourse was 15. In a larger group of 180 prostitutes belonging to Genoa, Turin, Venice, etc., and among 23 elegant cocottes of Italian and foreign origin, Moraglia obtained the same results. Every one admitted masturbation, and not less than 113 preferred masturbation, either solitary or mutual, to normal coitus. Among the insane, as among idiots, masturbation is somewhat more common among males, according to Blandford in England, as also it is in Germany, according to Necke, while Venturi in Italy has found it more common among females. There appears to be no limit to the age at which spontaneous masturbation may begin to appear. I have already referred to the practice of thigh-rubbing in infants under 1 year of age. J.P. West has reported in detail 3 cases of masturbation in very early childhood, 2 in girls, 1 in a boy, in which the practice has been acquired spontaneously, and could only be traced to some source of irritation and pressure from clothing, etc. Probably there is often in such cases some hereditary lack of nervous stability. Bloch has recorded the case of a girl, very bright for her age, though excessively shy and taciturn, who began masturbating spontaneously at the age of 2. In this case, the mother had masturbated all her life, even continuing the practice after marriage, and though she succeeded in refraining during pregnancy, her thoughts still dwelt upon it, while the maternal grandmother had died in an asylum from masturbatory insanity. Freud considers that autoerotic manifestations are common in infancy, and that the rhythmic function of any sensitive spot, primarily the lips, may easily pass into masturbation. He regards the infantile manifestations, of which thumb-sucking is the most familiar example, Lüdeln or Lutschen in German, as autoerotic, the germ arising in sucking the breasts, since the lips are an erogenous zone which may easily be excited by the warm stream of milk. But this only occurs, he points out, in subjects in whom the sensitivity of the lip zone is heightened, and especially in those who at a later age are liable to become hysterical. Shuttleworth also points out that the mere fidgetiness of a neurotic infant, even when only a few months old, sometimes leads to the spontaneous and accidental discovery of pleasurable sexual sensations, which for a time appease the restlessness of nervous instability, though a vicious circle is thus established. He has found that especially among quite young girls of neurotic heredity, self-induced excitement, often in the form of thigh friction, is more common than is usually supposed. Normally, there appears to be a varying aptitude to experience the sexual organism, or any voluptuous sensations before puberty. I find, on eliciting the recollections of normal persons, that in some cases there have been voluptuous sensations from casual contact with the sexual organs at a very early age. In other cases there has been occasional slight excitement from early years. in yet other cases complete sexual anesthesia until the age of puberty. That the latter condition is not due to a mere absence of peripheral irritation is shown by a case I am acquainted with, in which a boy of 7, incited by a companion, innocently attempted at intervals during several weeks to produce erection by friction of the penis. No result of any kind followed, although erections occurred spontaneously at puberty, with normal sexual feelings. I am indebted to a correspondent for the following notes. From my observation during 5 years at a boarding school, it seems that 8 out of 10 boys were more or less addicted to the practice, but I would not state positively that such was the proportion of masturbators among an average of 30 pupils, though the habit was very common. I know that in one bedroom, sleeping 7 boys, the whole number masturbated frequently. The act was performed in bed, in the closets, and sometimes in the classrooms during lessons. Inquiry among my friends as to onanism, in the boarding schools to which they were sent, elicited somewhat contradictory answers concerning the frequency of the habit. Dr. , who went to a French school, told me that all the older boys had younger accomplices in mutual masturbation. He also spoke with experience of the prevalence of the practice in a well-known public school in the west of England. B said all the boys at his school masturbated. G stated that most of his schoolmates were onanists. L said more than half was the proportion. At my school, manual masturbation was both solitary and mutual, and sometimes younger boys, who had not acquired the habit, were induced to manipulate bigger boys. One very precocious boy of 15 always chose a companion of 10 because his hand was like a woman's. Sometimes boys entered their friend's bed for mutual excitement. In after life they showed no signs of inversion. Another boy, aged about 14, who had been seduced by a servant girl, embraced the bolster. The pleasurable sensations, according to his statement, were heightened by imagining that the bolster was a woman. He said that the enjoyment of the act was greatly increased during the holidays, when he was able to spread a pair of his sister's drawers upon the pillow, and so intensify the illusion. Before puberty the boys appeared to be more continent than afterward. A few of the older and more intelligent masturbators regulated the habit, as some married men regulate intercourse. The big boy referred to, who chose always the same manipulator, professed to indulge only once in 20 days, his reason being that more frequent repetition of the act would injure his health. About twice a week for boys who had reached puberty, and once a week for younger boys, was, I think, about the average indulgence. I had never met with a parallel of one of those cases of excessive masturbation recorded by many doctors. There may have been such cases at this school, but if so, the boys concealed the frequency of their gratifications. My experience proved that many of the lads regarded masturbation as reprehensible, but their plea was, "Every one does it." Some, often those who indulged inordinately, and more secretly than their companions, gravely condemned the practice as sinful. A few seemed to think there was no harm in it, but that the habit might stunt the growth and weaken the body if practised very frequently. The greater number made no attempt to conceal the habit. They enlarged upon the pleasure of it. It was ever so much nicer than eating tarts, etc. The chief cause I believe to be the initiation by an older schoolmate, but I have known accidental causes, such as the discovery that swarming up a pole pleasurably excited the organ, rubbing to allay irritation, and simply curious handling of the erect penis in the early morning before rising from bed. I quote the foregoing communication as perhaps a fairly typical experience in a British school, though I am myself inclined to think that the prevalence of masturbation in schools is often much overrated, for while in some schools the practice is doubtless rampant, in others it is practically unknown, or at all events only practised by a few individuals in secret. My own early recollections of private school life fail to yield any reminiscences of any kind connected with either masturbation or homosexuality. And while such happy ignorance may be the exception rather than the rule, I am certainly inclined to believe that, owing to race and climate and healthier conditions of life, the sexual impulse is less precocious and less prominently developed during the school age in England than in some continental countries. It is probably to this delayed development that we should attribute the contrast that Ferreira finds, and certainly states too absolutely, between the sexual reserve of young Englishmen and the sexual immodesty of his own countrymen. In Germany, Necke has also stated that he heard nothing at school either of masturbation or homosexuality, and he records the experience of medical friends, who stated that such phenomena were only rare exceptions, and regarded by the majority of the boys as exhibitions of Schweinerei. At other German schools, as Hoche has shown, sexual practices are very prevalent. It is evident that at different schools, and even at the same school at different times, these manifestations vary in frequency within wide limits. Such variations, it seems to me, are due to two causes. In the first place, they largely depend upon the character of the more influential elder boys. In the second place, they depend upon the attitude of the headmaster. With reference to this point, I may quote from a letter written by an experienced master in one of the most famous English public schools. When I first came to a quarter of a century ago, Dr. was making a crusade against this failing. Boys were sent away wholesale. The school was summoned and lectured solemnly, and the more the severities, the more rampant the disease. I thought to myself that the remedy was creating the malady, and I heard afterward from an old boy that in those days they used to talk things over by the fireside, and think there must be something very choice in a sin that braved so much. Dr. went, and under we never spoke of such things. Curiosity died down, and the thing itself, I believe, was lessened. We were told to warn new boys of the dangers to health and morals of such offences, lest the innocent should be caught in ignorance. I have only spoken to a few. I think the great thing is not to put it in boys' heads. I have noticed solitary faults most commonly, and then I tell the boy how he is physically weakening himself. If you notice, it is puppies that seem to go against nature, but grown dogs never. So, if two small boys acted thus, I should think it merely an instinctive feeling after nature, which would amend itself. Many here would consider it a heinous sin, but those who think such things sins make them sins. I have seen in the old days most delightful little children sent away, branded with infamy, and scarce knowing why. You might as well expel a boy for scratching his head when it itched. I am sure the soundest way is to treat it as a doctor would, and explain to the boy the physical effects of over-indulgence of any sort. When it is combated from the monkish standpoint, the evil becomes an epidemic. I am, however, far from anxious to endorse the policy of ignoring the sexual phenomena of youth. It is not the speaking about such things that should be called in question, but the wisdom and good sense of the speaker. We ought to expect a headmaster to possess both an adequate acquaintance with the nature of the phenomena of auto-erotism and homosexuality, and a reasonable amount of tact in dealing with boys. He may then fairly be trusted to exercise his own judgment. It may be doubted whether boys should be made too alive to the existence of sexual phenomena. There can be no doubt about their teachers. The same is of course true as regards girls, among whom the same phenomena, though less obtrusive, are not less liable to occur. As to whether masturbation is more common in one sex than the other, there have been considerable differences of opinion. Tissot considered it more prevalent among women. Christian believed it commoner among men. Deslandes and Ivan Bloch hold that there are no sexual differences, and Garnier was doubtful. Lawson Tate, in his Diseases of Women, stated his opinion that in England, while very common among boys, it is relatively rare among women, and then usually taught. Spitzka, in America, also found it relatively rare among women, and Dana considers it commoner in boys than in girls or adults. Moll is inclined to think that masturbation is less common in women and girls than in the male sex. Rohleder believes that after puberty, when it is equally common in both sexes, it is more frequently found in men, but that women masturbate with more passion and imaginative fervour. Kellogg, in America, says it is equally prevalent in both sexes, but that women are more secretive. Morris, also in America, considers, on the other hand, that persistent masturbation is commoner in women, and accounts for this by the healthier life and traditions of boys. Pouillet, who studied the matter with considerable thoroughness in France, came to the conclusion that masturbation is commoner among women, among whom he found it to be equally prevalent in rich and poor, and especially so in the great centres of civilization. In Russia, Gutzeit states in his 30 Jahre Praxis that from the ages of 10 to 16 boys masturbate more than girls, who know less about the practice which has not for them the charm of the forbidden, but after 16 he finds the practice more frequent in girls and women than in youths and men. Necke, in Germany, believes that there is much evidence pointing in the same direction, and Adler considers masturbation very common in women. Maraglia is decidedly of the opinion, on the ground of his own observations already alluded to, that masturbation is more frequent among women. He refers to the fact, a very significant fact, as I shall elsewhere have to point out, that while in men there is only one sexual centre, the penis, in women there are several centres, the clitoris, the vagina, the uterus, the breasts, and he mentions that he knew a prostitute, a well-developed brunette of somewhat nervous temperament, who boasted that she knew 14 ways of masturbating herself. My own opinion is that the question of the sexual distribution of masturbation has been somewhat obscured by that harmful tendency, to which I have already alluded, to concentrate attention on a particular set of autoerotic phenomena. We must group and divide our facts rationally if we wish to command them. If we confine our attention to very young children, the available evidence shows that the practice is much more common in females, and such a result is in harmony with the fact that precocious puberty is most often found in female children. At puberty and adolescence, occasional or frequent masturbation is common in both boys and girls, though I believe less common than it is sometimes supposed. It is difficult to say whether it is more prevalent among boys or girls. One is inclined to conclude that it prevails more widely among boys. The sexual impulse, and consequently the tendency to masturbation, tend to be aroused later and less easily in girls than in youths, though it must also be remembered that boys' traditions and their more active life keep the tendency in abeyance, while in girls there is much less frequently any restraining influence of corresponding character. In my study of inversion, I have found that ignorance and the same absence of tradition are probably factors in the prevalence of homosexual tendencies among women. After adolescence, I think there can be no doubt that masturbation is more common in women than in men. Men have by this time mostly adopted some method of sexual gratification with the opposite sex. Women are to a much larger extent shut out from such gratification. Moreover, while in rare cases women are sexually precocious, it more often happens that their sexual impulses only gain strength and self-consciousness after adolescence is past. I have been much impressed by the frequency with which masturbation is occasionally, especially about the period of menstruation, practiced by active, intelligent, and healthy women, who otherwise lead a chaste life. This experience is confirmed by others who are in a position to ascertain the facts among normal people. Thus, a lady who has received the confidence of many women, told me that she believes that all women who remain unmarried masturbate, as she found so much evidence pointing in this direction. This statement certainly needs some qualification, though I believe it is not far from the truth as regards young and healthy women, who, after having normal sexual relationships, have been compelled for some reason or other to break them off, and lead a lonely life. But we have to remember that there are some women, evidently with a considerable degree of congenital sexual anesthesia, no doubt in some respect or another below the standard of normal health, in whom the sexual instinct has never been aroused, and who not only do not masturbate, but do not show any desire for normal gratification, while in a large proportion of other cases the impulse is gratified passively in ways I have already referred to. The autoerotic phenomena, which take place in this way spontaneously, by yielding to reverie, with little or no active interference, certainly occur much more frequently in women than in men. On the other hand, contrary to what one might be led to expect, the closely related autoerotic phenomena during sleep seem to take place more frequently in men, although in women, as we have found ground for concluding, they reverberate much more widely and impressively on the waking psychical life. We owe to Restif de la Bretonne what is perhaps the earliest precise description of a woman masturbating. In 1755 he knew a dark young woman, plain but well made, and of warm temperament, educated in a convent. She was observed one day, when gazing from her window at a young man in whom she was tenderly interested, to become much excited. Her movements became agitated. I approached her, and really believed that she was uttering affectionate expressions. She had become red. Then she sighed deeply, and became motionless, stretching out her legs, which she stiffened as if she felt pain. It is further hinted that her hands took part in this manoeuvre. Pictorial representations of a woman masturbating also occur in 18th-century engravings. Thus in France, Baudouin's Le Midi represents an elegant young lady in a rococo garden bower. She has been reading a book she has now just dropped, together with her sunshade. She leans languorously back, and her hand begins to find its way through her placket hole. Adler, who has studied masturbation in women with more care than any previous writer, has recorded in detail the autoerotic manifestations involved in the case of an intelligent and unprejudiced woman, aged 30, who had begun masturbating when 20, and practiced it at intervals of a few weeks. She experienced the desire for sexual gratification under the following circumstances: 1. Spontaneously directly before or after menstruation. 2. As a method to cure sleeplessness. 3. after washing the parts with warm, but not cold, water. 4. After erotic dreams. 5. Quite suddenly, without definite cause. The phenomena of the masturbatory process fell into two stages: 1. Incomplete excitement; 2. The highest pleasurable gratification. It only took place in the evening or at night, and a special position was necessary, with the right knee bent and the right foot against the knee of the extended left leg. The bent index and middle fingers of the right hand were then applied firmly to the lower third of the left labium minus, which was rubbed against the underlying parts. At this stage the manifestations sometimes stopped, either from an effort of self-control or from fatigue of the arm. There was no emission of mucus or general perspiration, but some degree of satisfaction and of fatigue, followed by sleep. If, however, the manipulation was continued, the second stage was reached, and the middle finger sank into the vagina, while the index finger remained on the labium, the rest of the hand holding and compressing the whole of the vulva, from pubis to anus, against the symphysis, with a backwards and forwards movement, the left hand also being frequently used to support and assist the right. The parts now gave a mushroom-like feeling to the touch, and in a few seconds, or after a longer interval, the complete feeling of pleasurable satisfaction was attained. At the same moment there was, but only after she had had experience of coitus, an involuntary elevation of the pelvis, together with the emission of mucus, making the hand wet, this mucus having an odour, and being quite distinct from the ordinary odourless mucus of the vagina. At the same time the finger in the vagina felt slight contractions of the whole vaginal wall. The climax of sexual pleasure lasted a few seconds, with its concomitant vaginal contractions, then slowly subsided with a feeling of general well-being, the finger at the same time slipping out of the vagina, and she was left in a state of general perspiration, and sleep would immediately follow. When this was not the case, she was frequently conscious of some degree of sensibility in the sacrum lasting for several hours, and especially felt when sitting. When masturbation was the result of an erotic dream, which occurred but seldom, the first stage was already reached in sleep, and the second was more quickly obtained. During the act it was only occasionally that any thoughts of men or of coitus were present, the attention being fixed on the coming climax. The psychic state afterwards was usually one of self-reproach. The phenomena in this case may be regarded as fairly typical, but there are many individual variations. Mucus emissions and vaginal contractions frequently occur before actual orgasm, and there is not usually any insertion of the finger into the vagina in women who have never experienced coitus, or indeed even in those who have. End of Auto-Eroticism, Part 3, Section 1.